So last meeting, we have started already with the methodology section of your paper, no? Starting with the research design. So a little review. When you say research design, it's our overall plan for our research, overall design on how we are going to gather our data, how to analyze the collected data, and how to present it to our readers. Now, I have started with the quali and the quanti, so that's the most widely used type or classification of research design in our institution. So we are now under quanti. Actually, we are done with the descriptive researches and the different types under that. Let's focus to experimental research because some of you might have this type of research design. I just don't know. Baka pag release kasi some of you class have actually submitted concept papers that are actually experimental. So pag sinabing experimental, this is future-oriented, meaning we are really going to conduct the experiment inside or outside the laboratory depending on the research topic. But if this is future-oriented because like after the experiment, that's the time we will know whether our substance or the thing that we are investigating is effective or not. Kasi yung tinitingnan talaga sa experimental research is whether the independent variable is effective in making a change or causing a change to our dependent variable. So yung sa prelim natin, I have discussed also what independent and dependent variables are. Di ba pag independent variable, that's our predictor variable. We are going to manipulate it in the study. Pwede natin siyang i-control. We can choose what to give as intervention. That's our independent variable. And then after that, we will measure its outcome. And the outcome is dependent variable. Okay, so we are going to do that systematically. So we are going to follow certain stages or steps in the experimental procedure. We will be objective with our results, unlike qualitative research that we are going to analyze our linguistic data based on our own understanding. This time, we will really follow scientific principles and then mathematical principles also in the analysis, like statistics. And then we will be controlling a lot of variables here just to ensure that there is no bias during the investigation. And then this bias might be causes of variation. So that is the reason why we are going to control them. But nevertheless, yung talagang purpose, objective, or even the advantage of our experimental research design is it is best used when we want to establish cause and effect relationships. Okay, cause and effect. Like this one variable can cause an effect to another variable. That's what we are establishing here. Unlike other research designs, example, descriptive research design, there is no cause and effect relationships there. Instead, we will just have a description of the phenomenon or description of the characteristics of our participants or respondents. Okay. However, what are the disadvantages of doing an experimental research? Number one here is artificiality. When you say artificiality, we don't really do things in its natural setting. Like when we want to investigate the antibacterial activity of like a substance, a plant material, for example, we don't really give the plant material directly to human, okay? Para ma-cure yung kanyang infection. We do that in vitro only, using our Petri dish and measuring the zone of inhibition. That's actually artificial, ang in vitro. And at the same time, we have a lot of testings in the laboratory that will only use machines or laboratory apparatus, or some might even use laboratory animals. Artificial yun lahat. Kasi our goal is like to produce an intervention most of the time for human, okay, human diseases or conditions, but we are not allowed to directly give those things to human. So everything will be artificial. And at the same time, most of our dilemma will be on the feasibility. Kasi there are things that we need in the experimentation that might not be available in the school. We cannot conduct it sa school, or kung sa outside natin siya ikakonduct, that will be very expensive for us. So magkakaroon tayo ng problema with the budget. Kasi doing experimental research, talagang maglalabas tayo ng pera dyan. Okay? And then yung mga equipment, chemicals pa na gagamitin natin. And lastly, we have an ethical. So an ethical, in case of, for example, we don't really give that to human subjects, but we use laboratory animals. But remember, class, animals do have rights also. So we have to consider their rights when we are going to use them in the experiment. So as much as possible, I don't know if you have seen students in the school bringing their mice or whatever, kung ano yung dinadala nila, rabbits ba, ganon. Wait lang ha. Bakit nabasa? Yan. Na-distract tuloy ako, nabasa siya. Okay. Ini-ensure nila, class, when they are going to inject something or administer something, ini-ensure kasi nila na hindi masyadong masasaktan yung animals dyan. Yan yung nasabi ko na animals have rights also. So, hindi dapat sila masyadong maka-feel ng pain. Kasi diba, pinag-aaralan na natin sila, tapos makaka-feel pa sila ng grabbing pain. Okay? And aside from that, sa mga sa mga institutions, organizations, or yung mga big laboratory companies, they actually do clinical trials. And when you say clinical trials, that's giving their drugs or their substance to human subjects na. So iba ding ethical consideration yon. So most likely may mga unethical things na magagawa dyan. Okay? Patayin sila. Not all animals na sinasubject to testing in the laboratory will be killed or will undergo euthanasia. Depende yon siya. Kapag ka may i-induce ka na sakit sa kanila, that's the time patayin natin sila after. Pero kung wala naman, hindi. Anong example dyan? For example, yung study sa yung blood sugar lowering. Tapos, ang ginagawa kasi, ginagawang diabetic yung mice. So, sinisira yung kanilang pancreas. Para after masira yung pancreas, tataas na yung kanilang blood sugar kasi wala nang insulin. So, yun, pinapatay talaga ang mice after kasi nag-induce ng sakit. Pero kung ang study is not really inducing any condition, like merong study last time sa school na parang hair grower lang siya, they used rabbit and then ina-apply lang nila yung kanilang substance doon sa back part of the rabbit, tapos chine-check yung growth ng kanilang buhok. Yun lang ang ginawa, hindi siya pinatay. So nag-rehabilitate lang sila. We call that rehabilitation, wherein naghahanap lang ng parang sasalo or mag-aalaga ng rabbit after na maging pet na siya. So yun, hindi lahat ng animals pinapatay sa laboratory. Okay. Nag-reply na si Ma'am Yas. Okay, that's good. Huh? You used to break the neck of the mice after using them for research. As in? We don't kill them. Kapag anong ginawa niya sa kanila? Did you induce any condition sa kanila or sakit? Kaya niyo sila pinatay after? And then we don't really break the neck. That's actually unethical. We don't break the neck of the animals if we are going to euthanize them. So yan yung tinatawag, class, na unethical. When we are going to euthanize the animals, class, we will be giving them we will be giving them anesthesia. Okay? I-anesthetize natin sila. Tapos, pwede natin silang ilagay sa carbon dioxide chamber para wala silang na-feel na pain. Mamamatay sila pero wala silang na-feel na pain. But we don't break the neck. That's unethical. That's very unethical. Maano tayo niyan. Makasabaan kita ni sa mga kanang animal rights na mga advocates and even sa law natin sa animals, bawal kasi yun. Bakit nag-break ang neck? Okay. And then actually, after na mamatay sila, na pag binigyan sila ng anesthesia or sa carbon dioxide chamber, nag-i-incinerate kasi tayo. So we will be doing, ano nga yan, yung sa dyan sa may Monticello. Ano tawag dyan? Nag-cremate. Okay. Gina-cremate natin sila after. Yan yung ginagawa sa mga animals. Okay? Pero again, do not kill all the animals used in the laboratory if you don't induce a condition. Yung example ko kanina, naging diabetic ang daga. So, kailangan natin siyang patayin. Kasi magsasuffer siya all throughout its life kung diabetic na siya. Yan yung nag-euthanize tayo. Okay, so the simplest experimental design includes at least two variables. We have the independent and the dependent variables. Sabi ko kanina, independent variables are our predictor variables. So they will predict what will happen to the dependent variable. So the outcome is the dependent variables. And at least two groups of participants. We have the experimental group. The experimental group class will receive the intervention, the proposed intervention. So it might be a substance that you are discovering or a substance from the plant material. Okay? That's the experimental group. So kung daga yun, isang grupo sila. Okay? Papainumin natin sila or mag-i-inject tayo nung pinag-aaralan natin na substance. While the other one is the control. So pwedeng hindi natin bigyan ng anything yung group na yon, yung mga animals na yon, wala talagang ipapainom sa kanila. Pero sa school class, para maging true experimental research kasi, most of the time, we have 3 groups of participants or 3 groups of subjects. Sa school meron tayong experimental group. Again, ito pa rin yung magre-receive of the substance being investigated. And then we have the positive control group. Okay? And the negative control group. So ano ito? Pag positive control group, ito yung magre-receive ng drug that is currently available in the market, proven and tested. So if this is a study about blood sugar lowering, ayan, pwedeng bigyan mo siya ng metformin. Di ba metformin is well known to be a drug for diabetes. Okay? And then pag negative control, most of the time we just use water. Kasi we don't expect water to cause an effect. Kaya tinawag natin siyang negative control. So this is most likely the design sa experimental research sa school, 3 grupo. Pero syempre, you still have the IV and the DP. Now, what are the characteristics of experimental research design? Syempre, most of the time, this is numeric. We will really have numerical values here, and we will cater a sophisticated statistical design. So after the experimentation, let's have the numerical data, and we will process the numerical data using statistical tools. And most of the time, we are only limited to small samples. Unlike descriptive research, when we do survey to a lot of people. Like umaabot ng 100, even umaabot ng 300 katao ang sinasurvey natin for a descriptive research. But for an experimental research class, we only use limited samples. And most of the time, if it is an animal study, sa isang grupo, pinakamaliit is 3. Example, kung gagamit tayo ng daga, 3 daga sa isang grupo. Sa experimental group, 3 daga. Sa positive control, 3 daga din. So yan yung ginagawa natin for experimental research. And this is labor intensive. Syempre, you will be doing a lot of experimental procedures in the laboratory. So marami kang gagawin. Exhausting. Doing experimental research is actually exhausting because of the different laboratory procedures and at the same time expensive, no? Kasi yung mga things na gagamitin. But actually, as medical students, doing an experimental research is actually fulfilling. That's the advantage. Yung mafe-feel mo talaga na medtech student ako, pharma student ako, or nursing student ako. That's the advantage of doing an experimental research compared to like when you are like doing surveys lang. Okay? Yun yung kaibahan when it comes to the fulfillment, ha. Now, when you say true experimental research design, kailangan mo ma-satisfy itong tatlo na ito. Pag may nawala dyan, you cannot call it anymore a true experimental research design. Pwede mo siyang tawaging experimental design, pero hindi na true. Okay? So what's the first one? Manipulation. Syempre, we have manipulation like in the laboratory. We are actually manipulating kung ano yung ibibigay natin na substance sa ating participants. Like this group of participants will receive my plant material, and you can manipulate actually what kind of plant material, what part of the plant material are you going to use. Okay, diba? Some of you will be using the leaves, yung iba fruits. There is manipulation there, and then you will be doing the testing. Pwedeng, yung sabi ko kanina, mag-induce ka ng sakit, papababain mo yung, patataasin mo yung blood sugar level niya. That's manipulation. Okay, tapos ibibigay mo na naman yung treatment mo. Tapos mag-test ka na naman. And then we have control. So, di ba, meron tayong other group of participants or subjects in our experimental research, pero pwedeng positive or negative control. And then we have also randomization. So I'll talk to you about randomization later. I will discuss that one. Kasi pag si randomization na wala, automatic class, hindi na yan siya true experimental research. So we have here an example of an experimental research. A medical doctor would like to introduce a new drug for the cure of typhoid fever. So he will be using two groups of patients. The one will be under the experimental group, and then yung isang grupo is the control group. Yung experimental group will receive the new drug na ipopropose niya for typhoid fever, while the other one, the control group, will just receive the ordinary drug that we have in the market, which is already proven to be a cure for typhoid fever. So after the experimentation, this medical doctor will can compare the effect of the two. Okay, so there is establishment of cause and effect relationship. If the result of the new drug is most likely the same with the effect of the ordinary drug or the proven drug, most likely we can conclude that the new drug is also effective for typhoid fever. Okay? Now, let's move on to the different experimental design. So just like our descriptive research na may mga different types tayo, like yung survey, correlational, comparative, developmental, etc. Ganon din sa experimental research. Meron din itong specific na types. Okay? Starting with pre-experimental design. So pag pre-experimental designs, they are not really true experimental research designs. Pre lang, ha. And ito yung mga subtypes under the pre-experimental designs. We have one-shot case study, single group pre and post-test design, static group comparison, and the parallel equated two-group design. Okay, so let's discuss them one by one. Pag sinabing one-shot case study, you will only have one group of participants here. One group of participants, I mean. Isang grupo lang talaga. So, di ba, hindi na siya true experimental kasi a true experimental will most likely have at least two groups. Ito, isa lang. Tapos, ang gagawin natin sa isang group of participants is bibigyan natin ng treatment. Kung ano yung intervention na ipopropose natin, example, thrombolytic, diretso na. Isang group lang ng blood, for example, tapos lalagyan natin kaagad yung blood ng treatment. So yung treatment will be your like plant material. And then after that, we will conduct the post-test. Okay, i-check natin kung talaga bang effective yung treatment doon sa example blood for thrombolytic na activity. So again, we don't have a control here. We only have one group of participants. That's the time we call it one-shot case study. And this is not a true experimental research. However, it can be called experimental research design pa lang. Tanggalin lang natin yung word na true. Okay? So another one, under the pre-experimental research design is the single group pre and post-test. So just like the one-shot case study, you also have one group of participants here that will receive the experimental variable or the treatment. X here is the treatment. Their difference is there is a pre-test. So magpe-pre-test ka muna before ka magbigay ng drug tapos or ng agent tapos magpo-post-test ka. So ano yung example nito? Example, blood sugar lowering. Sa pre-test, ito yung i-check mo muna yung blood sugar ng participants mo. Tapos pag na-check mo na mataas pala talaga yung kanilang blood sugar, bibigyan mo na yung intervention na pinopropose. And then after giving that, magpo-post test ka na naman, mag-check ka na naman ng blood sugar nila kung mataas pa ba or bumaba na. Okay? So this is again single group pre and post test. Yung kanina kasi post test lang siya. After the treatment, that's the time you do the testing. So walang pre-test na nangyari. Okay? I hope you understood the difference between the two. Do you have questions? You can ask questions if meron kang hindi naintindihan dyan. Okay, so the next one is the static group comparison. This time, class, dalawang grupo na ito. So meron kang first group dito and then meron kang second group. This first group class has an experience or like knowledge about sa intervention mo. Ito naman wala. Okay? Tapos, itetest natin sila and then i-compare natin yung result. Okay? So, like kung drug ito, the other one is will be receiving the experimental substance or example, the plant material. And then the other one might receive a placebo. Pwedeng the placebo is like walang effect. Wala siyang effect. So, pagkatapos, i-compare natin yung result ng testing. Pero, though we have two groups of participants there, hindi pa rin natin ito matatawag na true experimental research design because again, pag sinabing true, there is randomization. And you cannot see randomization here. You just only have two groups of participants. Pag sinabing randomization class, yun bang yung mga participants mo, ilalagay mo sa groups randomly. Hindi yung ikaw yung mamimili na, gusto ko ito ilagay sa group 1. Okay? Tapos yung isa, gusto ko dito siya sa group 2. O kaya hahatiin natin yung nasa malapit sa akin, group 1, yung nasa malayo na cage, group 2. Hindi yan siya random kasi. Pag random, talagang you will be giving equal chance to all the members of the population to be selected in the study. Okay? So, walang bias kasi kapag there is randomization. Yun yung nawala dito. So, kahit pa may two groups of participants ka for the static group comparison, again, hindi pa rin siya matatawag na true experimental. I don't know if you have done that one in your high school days na nag-experimental research kayo. I hope you really followed the randomization for you to be able to call it a true experimental research. Okay? And then we have the parallel equated two group designs. Parehas siya sa static group comparison actually. But parehas sila na may dalawang grupo. But what is the difference here? It's the presence of the pretest again. So you will be doing the pretest for both groups. The other group will have the process method. This is the class. This is the intervention that you are proposing. And then the other one will have the traditional method, or yung like kung drugs pa ito class, yung ginagamit na talaga natin. Yung example, thrombolytic or anticoagulant agent, kung magpo-propose ka ng anticoagulant, dito yung plant material mo. On the other group, you will have, for example, heparin. Okay? Para hindi mag-clot yung dugo. So, dito siya ilalagay sa control group. And then after that, you will be doing the post-tests. Okay? So, parang post-test, pre-test and post-test, pero dalawang grupo. We call it the parallel equated two-group design. Again, there is still no randomization. Here, as you can see, there is no randomization in the illustration or in the table. So again, this is only under the pre-experimental research design. Kasi ito yung mga true experimental designs natin. So please take note of this kasi pag medical student ka, most of the time, you will be expected to really do a true experimental research. So ano yon? We have here the pre and post-test control group, the Solomon 4 group design, the post-test only and the post-test control group design, post-test only. Okay? Isa-isahin natin sila. Pag pre-test, pre and post-test control group, parang ano lang siya, 'di ba, yung kanina na may pre-test and post-test tapos dalawang grupo, pero ano yung nadagdag diyan sa illustration na 'yan? You have here the R, meaning there is random assignment. Pag meron kang example, daga o kaya blood, magra-random assignment ka. Random assignment of the blood sa first group that will receive the experimental treatment or the substance that you are investigating, and then magra-random assignment ka din sa the other group that will receive the positive control. Most of the time, it will be positive control na treatment. Okay? So there is pre-test and post-test that will happen here. Before ka magbigay ng intervention, mag-check ka muna, mag-pre-test ka muna. Tapos after the intervention, magpo-post-test ka na naman. So again, we call it pre- and post-test control group, or this is under the true experimental research design. Do not forget the randomization. Without that, wala na, hindi na siya true experimental. And then the other one is the Solomon 4 group design. So ano naman itong Solomon 4 group design? Meron kang 4 na grupo. So as you can see, 4 ito, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So ano mangyayari sa 4 na grupo? There will be random assignment of your participants or your subjects in the 4 groups. Okay, you get rid of the bias ha, so random assignment yan. However, the group 1 will be undergoing a pre-test. Magpe-pre-test siya. This is pre-test here. Tapos, ibibigay mo yung treatment mo. Pagkatapos pagbigay ng treatment, you will conduct a post-test. That is for the group 1. Tapos, yung group 2, magpe-pre-test ka, yes, but walang treatment na ibibigay dito. Dediretso ka sa post-test. Okay? Tapos sa group 3, walang pre-test na mangyayari. Dediretso ka sa treatment. Pagkatapos ng treatment, magpo-post-test. And lastly, for the group 4, walang pre-test, walang treatment, pero magpo-post-test ka. So this is, among the true experimental research design, ito yung pinaka-sophisticated and ito yung parang matatawag natin na accurate, na you can really conclude at the end of the research that X here is really effective. Okay? So marami kang pagdadaanan if you are going to do the Solomon 4 group design. Most of us sa school class, ang research design is this one, the pre-test, the pre and post-test control group. Wala pa ako na-encounter so far na nag-Solomon 4 group design. Matagal kasi tayo matapos nito. Imagine you have 4 groups of participants. And yung iba, nagpo-post test only control group kasi may mga experimental research design talaga na wala kang magagawa na pre-test. So ang gagawin na lang, you will still have at least two groups of participants. There will be random assignment. The other one will receive the treatment tapos magpo-post test na diretso. Tapos the other one will be the control group. Pero both of them will undergo post-test. So kagaya nung study sa thrombolytic na well namang iro. Study sa thrombolytic, they have the first group and the second group. Tapos nilagyan nila yung first group, syempre experimental group, nilagyan nila ng plant material yung dugo, tapos nag-test na sila kung nag-coagulate ba or wala. Tapos yung isa, nagbigay sila ng treatment pero if I'm not mistaken, that was heparin. Tapos nag-post test na sila diretsyo. So walang pre-test na mangyayari, 'di ba? Kasi paano mo naman i-pre-test ito? Okay. Depende na lang. Depende 'yon sa requirement ng study kung need ba siya i-pre-test. Pero kung walang pre-test talaga na mangyayari, ito na lang yung gagawin natin, post-test only control group. This is still considered a true experimental research design. Okay, questions or clarifications? Wala. Sige, I hope nagkaintindihan tayo. Kasi class, isa ito sa i-ask talaga sa inyo ng panel before everything class starts. Before the discussion of your paper during the defense, talagang magtatanong yung panel sa inyo. What is the research design of this study? So you have to be clear with that. So number one, syempre you have to be clear whether your study is quantitative or qualitative, or pwede ding mixed method, depende sa study ninyo. Tapos number two, kung qualitative siya, anong klaseng qualitative research siya? Phenomenological ba? Historical, ethnographic, and so on. Kung quantitative naman, you have to be clear whether it is descriptive or experimental. Tapos kung descriptive, kailangan specific pa talaga. Anong klaseng descriptive research? Correlational ba kasi naghahanap kayo ng relationship between variables, or comparative lang siya kasi difference lang yung hinahanap ninyo. Tapos kung sa experimental naman na side, you really have to be clear whether it is a true experimental research design or not. Okay? Tapos kung na-identify niyo siya na true experimental siya, anong klaseng true experimental? Pre- and post-test control group, Solomon for group design, or post-test only control group? Okay, so pag-aralan nyo to kasi talagang itatanong ng panelist sa inyo itong mga bagay na ito, ha? Tapos it will be random. Syempre, I believe you are experienced when it comes to research kasi yan yung marami sa senior high, maraming research na nagawa. If I'm not mistaken ha, kasi sa doctors parang may research sa grade 11 tapos may research din sa grade 12. So, maraming research output 'yon. Nag-expect talaga na alam nyo itong mga bagay na ito. And then lastly, class, this is still under the experimental research design ha, pero this is not a true experimental research design. It's quasi, kaya nga siya tinawag na quasi. Quasi means like false or not true. Okay? So, pag nawala yung randomization, quasi-experimental lang tawag natin doon. Example, yung mga time series na experiment. Merong experiment tayo with anthelmintic agent. Tapos, like, gumamit sila ng plant material for this one. Tapos, syempre, since we cannot really collect a lot of Ascaris lumbricoides, no? Yung Ascaris natin sa tao, nag-substitute sila kasi almost the same yung characteristic ng Ascaris lumbricoides sa Ascarisum. So, di ba yung Ascarisum, ito yung nasa baboy. Ang ginawa nila, nag-collect sila ng mga Ascaris sa baboy doon sa mga slaughterhouse. Tapos nag-time series experiment sila. So like they have a lot of petri dish. So sa isang petri dish, at least for example, may 10 ascaris dyan. Tapos nilagyan nila class ng treatment. So example yung, what was the last plant material they used? I think it was pineapple. So yung pineapple na extract, syempre nilagay nila dyan. Okay? And then nag-time series sila on the first hour or after 30 minutes, chinek nila kung yung 10 ascaris dyan buhay pa ba or okay pa ba sila o kaya meron nang na-paralyze. And then after 1 hour na naman, after 2 hours, that's what you call a time series na experiment. So pag walang control group, walang positive control, walang negative control, walang randomization, time series lang talaga siya, quasi-experimental research design yon. Okay? Ganun din yung ginawa nila sa study sa pediculicide. Yung sa kuto, sa kuto, ganun pa rin ang ginawa nila. They have petri dishes. Nilagyan nila ng cotton kasi cotton will be parang substitute sa buhok para parang mag-mimic siya ng normal environment ng kuto. Talagang nagkuha sila ng kuto sa mga bata. Ambot asa to sila ng adto. Basta pag abot nila sa school, they have a lot of kuto na, I mean, na na-collect. Tapos, ganun pa rin parang 10 kuto kada petri dishes, and then nilagyan nila ng plant material nila bawat petri dishes, and then they do the time series experiment. So like they check after 30 minutes kung buhay pa ba yung mga kuto dyan or namatay na sila, and so on. Basta I remembered one of the group na gumamit ng parang I cannot remember the plant material na hindi talaga siya namatay ang kuto class. Like naabtan sila alas 10 sa gabi, grabe buhi pagyapon ang photo, going strong yun. Tapos ko dili na ta makahulat, alangan matulog ta sa eskwelahan. So muwi kami pagkabukas, sabi ko tingnan niyo ulit, buhi pa buhi pagyapon ang photo. So actually negative yung result ng kanilang experiment kasi yung kanilang plant material is not really pediculicide, hindi talaga siya makapatay ng kuto. Bale, namatay na lang yung kuto after parang 24 hours, more than 24 hours kasi nga wala na siyang pagkain. Yun na yung cause of death, hindi na because of the plant material. But anyway, that's just an example of a time series experiment. Okay? I hope naintindihan yon. Again, this is not a true experimental research. Okay? Sige, questions before tayo mag-move on kasi that's the last research design under the experimental. Questions or clarifications? Mag-move on na tayo sa third class na research design. The mixed method. Let's move on. Let's move on. Okay, mixed method researches. Pag mixed method, from the name itself, we are going to mix both quanti and quali. Meaning in your paper, you will have numerical data and at the same time, linguistic data. So most likely, pwede kang mag-conduct ng survey. So you will be using questionnaires. So sa questionnaires mo, may mga numbers ka dyan. So numeric data yon. And at the same time, you can conduct interview. Okay, so yun yung magiging quali mo na data or linguistic data. But mixed method researches class have sub-classifications or subtypes also. And we only have 3: convergent parallel, explanatory sequential, and exploratory sequential. So let's get to know them one by one kasi baka lang naman may magkakandak sa inyo ng mixed method research. Pero most of the time, ang gumagawa ng mixed method yung mga nagmamaster. Basta di ay, di ba, na magmasteral sa inyo ha, pag humanin nyo o eskwela. Kung uban sa inyo ha, mag-doctor, basig ang uban di ay will be working in the academe. Kasi pag nag-work ka sa academe, pag nag-teacher ka, like minimum requirement talaga is you have a master's degree. So yun yung pinaka-minimum na requirement. So, mag-eskwela yun, mag-masteral, ani. But, sige, if you are asked to do a mixed method research and it's convergent parallel design, ganito yung gagawin yung class. You will collect both linguistic and numerical data at the same time. Meaning in a single phase sa research. I-collect mo yung, example, nagpasagot ka ng questionnaire tapos mag-i-interview ka kaagad. So, the two data class na mako-collect mo, linguistic and numerical data, will be treated equally but they are independent from each other. You will just mix the results of both quanti and quali doon na sa overall interpretation mo. Wherein you are going to try to look for like convergence or divergence, yung mga magkapareho na result doon sa questionnaire and sa interview mo, or saan ba sila nag-contradict or may relationship ba yon. So the convergent parallel design is depicted in this figure. Meaning, ganito, mag-collect ka ng quali na data tapos i-analyze mo siya. Tapos mag-collect ka din ng quantitative data, i-analyze mo din. Okay? So independent yung analysis nilang dalawa. They will be treated equally. And after that, na na-analyze niyo siya, i-compare natin ang results ng quali and quanti. So we have here the point of interference. I-compare natin, meron bang pagkakaiba or magkapareho lang yung results ng kahit ba i-interview mo sila or papasagutin mo sila ng iyong questionnaire. And then after that, you make your own interpretation. Again, we call this convergent parallel design. Kasi at the end of the research, ipagsasama natin ang results ng dalawa. Okay? Now, the second one is explanatory sequential. So from the name itself, sequential, may sequence tayong sinusunod for this one. Balikan ko lang yung mga words dyan. Ayoko niyan. Let me explain the explanatory sequential using this diagram. Anong ginagawa dito? You first collect the quantitative data, meaning the numerical data. Yan yung nauna. Okay, this is the sequence. Tapos, after that, you analyze it. And then, you do a follow-up with collecting the qualitative data. And then, you analyze it before you give interpretation. Pero what is good with this type of mixed method research design is gagamitin yung result ng qualitative research to explain the quantitative data. Okay, kaya nga siya tinawag na explanatory sequential kasi the main purpose of collecting the qualitative research is to help us explain the numerical result. So we will be collecting the two at different time. And ang qualitative study is dependent sa quantitative na result. So ano example niyan? We have here an example. Example here, I am going to conduct a study sa mga caregivers' attitude towards the elderly population. So like magde-design ako ng sarili kong questionnaire, tapos ibibigay ko siya sa mga caregivers, tapos ipapasagot ko sa kanila kung ano yung attitude nila towards the elderly population. Tapos, pagka-collect ko ng aking data sa questionnaire, nakita ko there is high degree of caregiver stereotyping sa mga elderly population, especially doon sa issues about race and gender. So, yan yung nakuha ko, for example, na result sa questionnaires ko. Now, hindi ko siya maintindihan. Bakit kaya merong mataas yung degree ng kanilang stereotyping sa case na yan? So, para maintindihan ko siya, mag-quali ako. Meaning, gagawa ako ng interview guide based sa result dito sa questionnaire ko. And then, i-interview ko yung some of the caregivers. Now, yung kanilang isasagot sa interview, gagamitin ko yan para ma-explain ko ito. Okay, so yan yung sinasabi na the qualitative study is dependent doon sa quanti. Kung ano yung magiging result, yun yung itatanong mo doon sa quali. Okay? Tapos ang result ng quali, gagamitin mo ulit para i-explain ang result ng quanti. Anong tawag dito? Explanatory sequential. Okay? Mauna yung quanti before ang quali. Okay? Now, ang last naman for our mixed method design is exploratory sequential. Okay? Exploratory sequential. Baliktad naman ito. Ang exploratory sequential class, mauuna si qualitative data. Iko-collect muna siya, tapos i-analyze. Tapos, gagamitin ang result ng quali to make, kaya may nakalagay dito builds to make the quantitative research questionnaire and mako-collect mo na yung quantitative or numerical data mo. Tapos pag na-collect mo na sila lahat, maglalagay or maggagawa na tayo ng interpretation. So ano bang ibig sabihin nitong exploratory sequential? This is the other name for exploratory sequential is instrument development design. So maggagawa ka ng instrument mo. Instrument, I'm referring into the questionnaire. So for example, meron kang topic, gusto mong mag-conduct ng survey, pero wala kang background about your topic. Hindi mo alam kung ano yung itatanong mo doon sa questionnaire mo. So para magkaroon ka ng background, siguro mag-interview ka muna sa community kung ano yung nangyayari dyan, ano yung situation, para meron kang background information. So pag meron ka ng background information, tapos ka nang nag-interview, meron ka nang pwedeng isulat na question doon sa questionnaire mo. So yan yung sinasabing instrument development design, exploratory sequential, kasi we are going to explore first what is happening in the field or to whatever na isa-study natin. Tapos pagkatapos, makakagawa tayo ng sarili nating instrument. So most likely, ginagamit natin ito, syempre again, pag ang instrument ay hindi available and gusto mong gumawa ng sariling instrument mo. Or kung hindi natin alam yung variables, yun yung sabi ko kanina na wala tayong parang background information about our topic. So let's have the interview first in the community. Okay? Or if we don't have theories or we don't have guides sa topic natin, yun yung time na magkakandak tayo ng exploratory sequential. So again, mauuna si quali, tapos quantitative data. Okay? So ito yung example ng ating exploratory sequential, comparing the practices of rural and urban communities' attitude towards COVID-19. So ang first question, what are the practices of rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19? Ang ginawa dito, since this is the first question, syempre this is answerable by linguistic data. So, ang researcher nito ay mag-i-interview first sa mga people living in the rural area and at the same time the urban area para alam niya ano ba practices doon. So, isusulat yon. That's the linguistic data. Tapos, yung result ng linguistic data ay gagamitin to make a questionnaire para ma-answer itong question number 2. Is there a significant difference in the level of practices of rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19? So, ayun na. Masasagot na natin yan kasi may questionnaire na tayo, may numerical data na tayo. We cannot answer kasi this with a linguistic data. We cannot see the difference, the significant difference pag linguistic data lang siya lahat. So, gagamitan natin ito ng questionnaire. Okay? So, dalawang data yung na-generate mo, linguistic and numeric na data. Okay? Questions or clarifications? Tapos na tayo class sa ano. This is the end of the research design. So, I hope kapag sabi din, pag meron na kayong title, kailangan i-discuss nyo na among yourselves ano yung magiging research design ninyo. Okay? Wait lang ha. Ang daming laman ng recording. What research will I show you? This one is for the experimental na research. Let's check. Okay, this is anticoagulant activity of Codium fragile marine algae as an alternative for heparin additive. Oops. Hindi siya mag-load. Ah, load pala. Well, let's see their SOP. There is, this one is for the clot formation, no? Tapos may significant difference ba yung clot formation ng heparin and then yung kanilang material. So if you're going to look at their methodology. Ayan, this is their methodology and we have a research design. This one is time series pala. Ginamit nila. Quasi-experimental time series. Though they have both groups, I think they did not do randomization here. So they did not call this a true experimental research design. Nag-time series lang sila with their blood clot, I guess. After mixing the blood with their plant material, and then the other one is like yung sa heparin, they did a time series. Okay, like after 1 hour, they check the clot and so on. So this one is again experimental but a quasi-experimental research design. Okay? So medyo konti lang naman yung nasulat dyan. Explain nyo lang naman kasi you have to identify lang kung anong research design yun. Tapos explain nyo bakit. Yeah, available sa library yung mga researches from the previous batches. Except sa yung talagang bago lang. Yung sa 4th year ninyo, wala pa yung research nila sa library kasi they were not able to submit pa their hardbounds. Wala pang hardbounds yung sa kanila. Sa December pa kasi yung deadline ng hardbound nila. Pero yung mga previous batches, yes, nasa library na. What else? This one. Knowledge, attitude, and practices towards face mask disposal amidst COVID-19 pandemic. Before you can actually conclude what research design are you going to use, you really have to check first the SOP. So we have here the SOP nila, demographic profile, level of knowledge, level of attitude, practices, and then on the last part, they were asking about relationship. So is there a significant relationship between the level of knowledge, attitude, and practices? And is there a significant relationship between demographic profile and the knowledge, attitude, and practices ng kanilang respondents? So since this is asking about relationship, let's look at their class research design. If tama ba itong sinulat nila dito? Or this one. Study will utilize quantitative, descriptive research design, specifically correlational study. Okay, this one is correct. So, quantitative, descriptive siya, but specifically, this is correlational since they are asking or they want to determine if there is a significant relationship between their variables. So, after identifying what type of research design are they going to use, they explain actually. Nag-explain sila what is a quantitative research, what is a descriptive, and what is a correlational research. That's how you do the research design under the methodology section. So methodology had tapos a little paragraph. This is just a little introduction on what the researchers or the readers, I mean, would expect in this section. I-introduce nyo lang na ito yung laman ng methodology. Tapos before starting with the research design. Tapos after that will be the research local. So let's go back to our discussion and let's see what research local is. So research local class, it's our area, our venue, our site wherein we are going to conduct our study. So this is where we are going to do the experimentation, if it is an experimental research, or is the area where we are going to collect our data. Like if we are going to do a survey, dito tayo magsa-survey. That's a research local. But if the research local is an institution, for example, GSD-MSFI, dun yung inyong mga respondents or dun kayo magkakandak ng experiment, you have to include a brief discussion or description of the institution, including its mission, vision, and even its goals or objective. So, wait lang ha, nasa agad. Okay, pala. Now, let's have an example for the research local, how they did the research local. We have here, the research will be conducted in General Santos City. So sa Jensen sila, pero they have specified that it will be in Barangay Kalumpang. And if we are going to read more in their research local, they have actually provided here a description of Barangay Kalumpang. So yung description na sa ano yung mostly work ng mga tao na settler doon, and ilan na yung population, and so on. Okay? Sasali niyo yan siya. Let us have some more examples. We have here this one, the medical fake news. This is still a correlational study. Kasi yung question nila dito sa SOP, is there a significant relationship pa rin? Okay, significant relationship. So for the methodology section, ayan, ay nasira yung ano. Nasira siya. Dapat next page pa yan. So, research design, tama. Quantitative. And then, this one. Descriptive research design, specifically correlational. And then, let's look at their research local. Okay, their study is conducted in General Santos City. Anong kaibahan nila? The previous example is nakakoncentrate sila sa Barangay Labangan lang. Pero ito, it's the whole General Santos City. So, what they have provided here in their research local is actually the description ng Gensan. Saan siya located, yung population niya, and then they even included the different barangays in Gensan. So, hindi sila nakakoncentrate sa isang area lang. So, buong Gensan talaga yun. Bibigyan nyo ha ng description. Okay? And then, let's have some more for an experimental research. I want the study. Wait lang. What is this research for? About this one. This one. So this one is an experimental research, blood sugar lowering activity of formulated tea from Nephelium lapacum rambutan leaves in alloxan-induced diabetic Swiss albino mice. Siyempre, experimental research ito. Pero let's see how they did their research local. Mas mahaba ang research local ng experimental research class. Kasi marami kang local of the study. Let's see. Okay, this is the methodology, this is the research design, and this is the research local. So as you can see, their study was conducted at the Pharmacy Laboratory 2 of GSD-MSFI kasi they did their experiment there sa Pharma Lab. And then they provided a description of the GSD-MSFI. Medyo mahaba yan, no? Description ng GSD-MSFI. Naglagay lang sila ng research methodology nila na parang figure. Tapos, may dagdag pa kasi ito. Hindi ko lang siya nakita. Pero, ayan. Aside from the description of the GSD-MSFI, may ikalawang local pa sila sa study. Okay? Ito yung place ng pag-experiment, ang GSD-MSFI. Pero ang second local is kung saan nila kinuha yung kanilang plant material. So, there we have the leaves of Nephelium lapacum, were collected from Kiamba, Sarangani province. And may ikatlong, ano pa ito? May ikatlong local pa sila. The Swiss albino mice that were used in the study were collected from Barangay Aplaya, Santa Rosa, Laguna. Okay. So, yan yung sinasabi kong medyo mas mahaba yung research local of an experimental study kasi yung mga things na gagamitin mo in research, kung saan mo sila kinuha, ilalagay mo din sa research local aside from the place of the experimentation itself. Okay? Hindi kagaya nung sa descriptive na study na isang place lang talaga, kung Jensen lang. So you'll just provide a description ng Jensen or kung sa isang barangay. Ganon. So again, that is called the research local that will be placed after the research design. Okay? Now we have the sampling technique. Okay. So sa sampling technique, sa research kasi class, we don't usually do population study. When I say population study, yun yung class, yung lahat ng members of the population, isasali mo talaga sa research mo. So kung mag-survey ka, talagang kung merong 1 million residents dyan sa Jensen, talagang magsasurvey ka sa buong 1 million. Yan yung tinatawag na population study. But since mahirap masyado yung population study, nagsasampling lang tayo. When you say sample, balikan ko yan ha. Ito yung meaning ng sample natin. When you say sample, it's actually a representative taken from the population. So kaya meron tayong tinatawag na sampling technique. Ito yung magiging section after class ng research local. You really have to identify what sampling technique are you going to use. Okay? But before that, you have to provide description first of your population and your sample. So pag sinabing population, ito yung talagang pag-aaralan mo in your study. Sila yung magiging subject of your study and lahat ng characteristics na hinahanap mo, kailangan nandoon sa population mo. So they will be like the parameters or yung mga measurement na kailangan mo, mami-measure mo talaga sa kanila. So like it's a universe of your studies. For example, you want to study the pharmacy students and doctors, syempre your population mo will be all the first year pharmacy students. Kung RadTech faculty, silang lahat, population mo yon. And the senior citizen in Jensen. So lahat ng senior sa Jensen, yun yung population mo. So like again, ito yung parang magiging respondents or participants or subject mo sa study. Okay, so for example, ang population mo is yung senior citizen. Ito this time is Senior Citizens Association of Cabanatuan City, members ng association na ito. So they have provided this one under sa sampling technique. Ina-identify nila na ito yung kanilang respondents, yung member ng Senior Citizen Association of Cabanatuan, and then yung 60% nun is yung SSS retirees, and itong part na itong purposive sampling, mamaya ko na i-discuss or next meeting kasi ito na yung tinatawag na sampling technique. But nevertheless, before mo kasi sasabihin na ito yung sampling technique mo, kailangan mo munang i-describe yung population mo. Okay? So, meron tayong two kinds of population. The one that can be counted is called a finite population. So, just like residents of Jensen, you can actually count that. And we have census. So, you can always get numbers for the population. But if it cannot be counted, we call that infinite populations. For example, stars in the sky, how would you count that? And the number of pedestrians that will cross the street. Again, that's infinite population. But most likely, we will be dealing with a finite population. But again, we don't usually do a population study. Instead, we just get samples. This is a small group of or portion from your population. You will take it out and make it as representative. Okay? So we will expect that since they are taken from the population, they will still have the characteristics that we are looking for. Okay? So why do we do sampling? Number one, it will be very expensive for us to get the entire population. Remember, you will do a survey for the whole 1 million. If, for example, we are indeed 1 million. Okay? And it will be very difficult for us to reach them. It will take a lot of time for us to complete the study. Okay? And actually, samples, sabi ko nga kanina, you can still make conclusion, inferences, or generalizations with your sample. Because again, they are representative to our population. So we have here steps in sampling. How do we do that? Number one, syempre, you have to first identify your population. Yung example ko kanina, yung fear-mongering, yung population nila, millennials. So they really exhaust everything, every means to get the total number of millennials in General Santos City. Okay? And then meron ding population nila is residents of Barangay Kalumpang. Okay? So you have to be clear with that. Kung sa experimental study, depende kung anong subject mo. Like if you're going to use laboratory animals, then that will be your population. Yung laboratory animals na yan, yung mice na yan. Pero most likely, limited kasi yung ating sample sa experimental procedure. So wala tayong problema when it comes to the sampling. Ang problema talaga for the sampling is yung qualitative research and at the same time yung descriptive na research. Kailangan mo muna talagang i-identify yung population tapos pagkatapos, i-determine mo pa, i-compute mo pa yung sample size before ka magse-select ng iyong sample. Okay? So, sige, let's have the computation kasi after identifying your population, magko-compute ka. So, kapag may research na kayo class, tapos descriptive ang research nyo, I hope wala nang magtatanong sa akin, ma'am, unsa among sample size? Kasi this is the answer class. This is how you are going to compute your sample size. Basig na imong tanong sa ko, ma'am, pila ka buok among i-interview, ma'am? Or pila ka buok ang among hatagan sa among survey questionnaire? Okay, again, this is how you're going to compute ha. This is called class the Sloven's formula. Ang tawag natin dito is Sloven's formula. Ay, doon naman akong agi. That's Sloven's formula. Now, n is equal to n divided by 1 plus n(e) squared. The small letter n there is the sample or the sample size. The capital letter N is the population size. And the letter E here, this is letter E. This is the margin of error. And then, bakit may margin of error tayo? Kasi we are giving room for like mistakes or error in our research, since again, we are not doing a population study. Nagsasample lang tayo. So we are not expecting a 100% accurate result. So a minimum of 5%, that will be our margin of error. So the 95% remaining, we are actually confident na tama yung makukuha natin na result. So let us have an example. Example, ang population mo lang is like residents of Barangay Kalumpang. Example lang ito, the residents, gamay kayo, no? Pero anyway, example lang, the residents of Barangay Kalumpang is 20,000 according to census. Now, magsa-survey ka. So, syempre, hindi mo lahat ng 20,000 bibigyan ng ganyan, no? So, magko-compute tayo. So, N is equal to, the capital letter N is the population size divided by 1 plus, again, N, 20,000 pa rin yan, times E squared. Again, our minimum is 5%. So that's 0.05 and then I-square mo siya. Okay? And then 20,000 divided by 1 plus 20,000 times, what is the square of 0.005? It's 0.0025, right? Tama? Let's check. Atay trust issues sa itong mental math. Yeah, that's 0.0025. Okay? And then let's continue. 20,000 divided by 1 plus 20,000 times 0.0025. That's 50. Tama? It's 50. Yeah, this is 50. And then 20,000 divided by 51. Sige, divide natin. Divided by 51. This is 392.5. 0.15. Pero class, remember, you cannot do a survey sa 0.15 na tao. So we will round this off to 392. So ito yung magiging sample size. Kung meron kang 20,000 na population in your area, you will just be having a sample size of 392. Ito lang yung bibigyan mo ng questionnaire mo and papasagot mo sila sa iyong questionnaire. Again, this process is called the Sloven's formula. Yeah, marami talaga. How much more if your respondents are the whole General Santos City, residents of General Santos City. Pila naman takabuo karon, million? So most likely you have to collect a lot of ano talaga, results, no? Kasi kailangan tama yung sample size natin, class, for it to become a good representative of the population. Pag hindi kasi lesser than that, hindi talaga tayo makakagawa ng like yung sure tayo na conclusion kasi nga kulang, hindi siya magiging representative. Okay? But I'll show you another way on how to determine the sample size. We still have another way. This one is like, mas madali. Mas madali ito. Pero you just have to divulge in your paper under the sampling technique that in computing your sample size, you use either the Sloven's formula or you use this one. Okay? Rausoft calculator. Just, search sa Google the Rausoft calculator and then use this one. Bali, ganito siya. Diretso na siya. Yung result nito, may slight difference lang than the Sloven's formula, but nevertheless, both of them are accepted. So it's up to you kung ano yung gagamitin ninyo. Ang pinaka-importante lang is kailangan nyo siyang isulat sa papel ninyo kung ano yung ginamit nyo in computing the sample size. So as is ito, class, yung what margin of error can you accept? 5% talaga yung minimum natin. And syempre, the remaining 95% is our level of confidence. Itong what is the response distribution, leave this as 50%. Huwag niyo na itong baguhin. Kaya para normal distribution yung data natin. And dito lang yung papalitan mo, what is the sample or what is the population size. So pag alam mo na yung population size mo, ilagay mo lang dyan. So yung kanina, di ba sabi ko 20,000. So we have here, magbibigay na siya kaagad ng recommended sample size and that is 377. So di ba there is a slight difference with that of the Sloven's formula. But again, this one is still accepted. Konti lang naman yung kanilang difference. So how much more na kung masyadong marami yung population ng isang area. Example, 50,000. Ay, 500,000 na yan. 50,000. So that will be 382. Okay? Kung sa school lang, if you want to conduct a survey sa lahat ng medtech students, pila na ba mo kabuo karon? I don't know your population. So maybe mga 500 kayo lahat. So kapag ka medtech students yung inyong respondents, so out of the 500, the recommended sample size is 218. So that's like it's almost 50%, no? Almost katunga sa inyo yung iso-survey ninyo. Okay? So these are the examples, class, of methods on how to know the sample size in your research. So pag talagang descriptive ang research ninyo na magkakandak talaga kayo ng survey, please know first the population size so that you will know kung gaano karami din yung tao na survey ninyo. Okay? Questions or clarifications? Sige ha. Kasi na makalimot. Tapos mga naman, paano man namo tumabalaan, ma'am? Ang among population size. So again, yung error natin ha, it's the allowable area for non-precision. Since sample man yung ginamit natin, hindi man siya population. Talagang magbibigay tayo ng room for error. Okay? So yung sampling technique, dito napapasok yung mga different sampling techniques that we can use. We actually use the rule of the thumb method, wherein 20% of the population frame for a sample is tenable or would suffice. Kaya lang wala itong statement ng validity. Pag sinabing 20% lang, like mag-compute ka lang, example 1,000 yung population mo, times 0.2, mga 200 lang yung maging respondent mo. Okay lang naman, tinatanggap naman siya na 20% lang, pero wala ka talagang statement for validity for this. For descriptive, normative, and survey research, ginagamit natin is central limit theorem. Pag descriptive normative, yung ikaw mismo yung gagawa ng iyong questionnaire, tapos syempre ibibigay mo na, magsasample ka na. So, ano ba yung ginagawa natin for this? If the population size is not large, 50% and above can be considered. So most of the time, kailangan talaga natin ng 50%. Pag hindi naman masyadong malaki ang population, so just like 1,000 lang, so bali 500 or more lang, no? Isuda na yung survey of 500 katao. But kung masyado nang malaki yung population, kagaya ng kanina, 20,000, nag-compute na talaga tayo using Sloven's formula or yung raw software. So please take note of this na a sample size that is less than 50 but more than 30%, parametric statistics may be considered. So ano na siya, may effect kasi ito sa statistical treatment. I don't know if ano yung background niyo sa statistics class, but di ba we have two types of statistical tools, parametric and non-parametric. So kapag less than 50 but more than 30, pwede na natin siyang gamitan ng parametric statistics, but yung interpretation natin may be limited for the sample considered only. Hindi talaga tayo makakagawa ng conclusion for the whole population. Tapos kung less than 30% yung ating sample size, we cannot, and then hindi siya nag-randomization, meaning non-probability ang sampling like purposive sampling, yung limited, mas masamot nga limited ang ato ang conclusion. It will just be limited to the sample only. And when it comes to the statistical analysis, we will just be using the non-parametric test. Sa finals, if I still have time, I'll have a review of statistics sa inyo para you know what statistical test are you going to use with your study and paano nyo siya gagawin talaga na kayo na lang yung mag-stat. Kasi yung sa pharma, since ako yung teacher nila sa stat, wala na silang gastos sa statistics nila. Sila na lang mismo yung nag-stat sa sarili nilang data. Okay? But I hope I can have that one sa inyo ha. Okay, what time is it? Kasi naglampas na kung naganahan ako istorya din. Ito yung two kinds of sampling class or two kinds of sample, probability sample and non-probability sample. Sabi ko sa inyo, pag probability yung sampling technique, meaning all the members of the population will have equal chance to be selected in your study. So ito yung random samples na tinatawag. And kapag random samples kasi, they are considered as the best representative ng ating population. And since this is the best representative for our population, the findings of the study, if you have probability sample, are valid and ginagamit talaga siya to make inferences, generalizations, or conclusions about the characteristics of your population. Pero kapag non-probability sample, ito yung sample na kinuha mo from the population pero wala silang equal chance to be selected in the study. So hindi mo siya matatawag talaga na representative ng population. And we cannot use this to make inferences, conclusion, or generalizations about our populations. Ano bang ibig sabihin nito? Example, my study is qualitative research and I want to interview medtechs in the hospital. Okay, now, pag nag-non-probability sampling ka, pwede siyang yung sampling by chance or convenient sampling na pagpunta mo doon sa hospital, kung sino lang yung nag-duty doon, sila lang yung mai-interview mo. So wala na siyang equal chance, no? Kasi paano yung mga off-duty during that time? O kaya yung shift nila is pag after pa. Like pumunta ka ng 10 o'clock. So kung sino yung nag-duty ng 7 to 3, yun lang yung na-interview mo. Yung the rest na walang duty at that time, hindi mo na sila may interview, wala na silang equal chance to be selected in your study. Ang tawag dyan, class, non-probability sampling. O kaya the sample is called non-probability sample. So again, hindi ito magandang representative sa ating population, and then we cannot use the results there as to make inferences or conclusion. So as much as possible, especially for experimental research, we will do probability sampling. We will do randomization para talagang reliable ang ating results. Okay? Anong time na? Mabibitin ako pag magsa-start ako. So I think I have to end here. Next meeting we'll have a quiz class that will be after intrams. We will have a quiz from the start up to here. And then after the quiz, we will have the discussion on the different probability sampling techniques. Paano ba siya ginagawa? And yung non-probability sampling techniques. Okay? And ako here kasi 7 minutes na lang, mabibitin na talaga ako with my discussion. For the meantime, do you have questions or clarifications? Morning. Sure. Sige. So,